Yo, what's up, chefs? It's Vinny, and today I just wanted to have a little chat about Last Epoch and kind of just give you guys my updated opinion / review of the game now that I've finally had the opportunity to get to plus 300 corruption and successfully take down Abberoth as well. So I've got a nearly 5,000 character Word document written up and some good faith but strong criticisms of the game, while also just highlighting some of the many different things it does really well. To provide a little bit of context, for those of you that didn't watch my previous video where I gave my first impressions of the game after getting to about level 65 and starting to progress normal monoliths, the super quick recap is that I basically gave it a tentative 8 out of 10, where I had mostly good things to say, but there were a few things that I was not nearly as happy with that were leading me to think that the game was just not going to keep me engaged long term. Namely of which was sort of the relationship between character progression and the difficulty of the game, or at least what I had experienced thus far, and the oversimplified version here would be to just say that the game felt too easy, which was clearly a common sentiment felt by a good chunk of players.
Been a complete joke the entire time, Still Mage. 99.9999999% of the game is just holding W, everything in the game evaporating in front of you. Like just.
But I do actually think it's quite a bit more nuanced than that. With that being said, as the community will quickly let you know, this game has a severe case of the real game doesn't actually start until Endgame.
Knows that if you've not reached corruption, you unironically haven't even played the game. Like if you've never done empowered, you've basically never even played the game.
But seriously, before you call the game too easy, maybe you should get into empowered monoliths first. By the way, buddy, seriously, you should genuinely actually get to empowered monoliths, like the actual end game.
And when most people say this, they aren't even talking about regular endgame. They're actually talking about the endgame plus mode, aka empowered monoliths, where you can start adding corruption, which is an infinitely scaling difficulty mechanic that sort of just artificially juices up the difficulty of your content, alongside adding in the Forgotten Knights and Harbingers, which do eventually lead you to Abberoth. Now, if you ask me, this is really just a way to cope and try and make the entire campaign, endgame, pre-corruption, and ultimately the entire new player experience just immune from any criticism whatsoever, which is not only ironically extremely counterproductive to the future success of the game, but also just comes across as sort of elitist in a game that is seemingly trying to find its place as a more casual or new ARPG player-friendly alternative to POE 2. Regardless of my feelings about that though, to try and give the game as fair a shake as possible, I still decided to push through the end game, up to 300 plus corruption, get my character in a pretty decent spot, and then ultimately take out Abberoth, before coming back to give sort of my refined and just final thoughts on the game before I head back over to PoE 2 to start up my Chaos.lich. And if you are one of the people sitting there thinking to yourself that the game doesn't actually start until you've added 652.69 and 2/3 corruption, beaten Uber Abberoth, or whatever arbitrary point you decide upon, and that no one should be allowed to have an opinion until they get there, then seek mental help. This is supposed to be genuine constructive criticism and feedback for the game, where the only intent is to spark discussion that will hopefully lead to its improvement. You're welcome to disagree with any and everything I say, but if you support Last Epoch, then you should be open to everyone that is trying to voice criticisms in good faith. Starting off with the good stuff first, as usual, like I said before, I do have a lot of things to go through, so I'm going to try and rapid fire through these just a little bit without leaving anything out that's majorly important. First up is going to be boss fights, with the caveat that you're at a high enough corruption that you can't just face tank all of the mechanics, which, depending on your build, could be quite high corruption. But with that caveat out of the way, I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10. I actually think the boss fights are very well done. I'm personally a big fan of the flashy, telegraphed attacks. They give you ample time to interact with the mechanic, do whatever you need to do to satisfy it, and if you don't interact with the mechanic, you should expect to die. It's very reminiscent of raids in World of Warcraft. Abberoth in particular, the boss fight you've been seeing on screen, very reminiscent of a final mythic tier raid boss, which in my eyes is a massive, massive compliment in the context of an ARPG game. So honestly, very, very good. I think it's just a massive shame that you really can't appreciate the bosses whatsoever for the first like 10 plus hours of gameplay if you're not somebody that knows explicitly how to just zoom to the end game in every way possible. Up next is character design. I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10. I had really positive feelings about this in my first impressions video, and I still do. I think the skill specializations are really, really cool, very intuitive. They add a decent amount of customization to your gameplay without being overly complex. Passive tree is good. The mastery freedoms, the ability to choose a mastery, but then still invest points into the other masteries, at least the first half of the tree. It's quite cool. Once again, another thing that's reminiscent of WoW in some ways, like way back in the day, classic WoW, etc. Being able to respec your mastery, great. I know they just added that this patch, but still a good decision. And yeah, ultimately, like I said, there's a lot of creativity within it, within like the whole character design system, without it being overly complex. It's quite intuitive, and it's a little bit limited in depth in comparison to something like POE, but it's much more, expansive than something like Diablo 4 in my opinion, and different strokes for different folks. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's quite good. Crafting is still going to be like a 9.5 or a 10 out of 10 for me, except for the ways that I feel it actually negatively impacts the character progression and difficulty issues, which I'll expand upon later in the bad stuff section, and the fact that I think forging potential is actually sometimes pretty restrictive or annoying in the end game specifically, but outside of that, it's just very well done, insanely flawless, or maybe not flawless, but insanely well done. It's enjoyable and accessible to players of all skill levels, which I think is very, very important. Something that's very lacking in PoE 2, like the crafting omens, for example. Practically nobody gets to use those, and that's, there's not many crafting options in PoE 2, as I'm sure many of you know. So having one of the limited options not even be accessible is quite annoying. Outside of that, though, it's still really good. Extremely high quality of life. The set item crafting via the woven echoes or being able to like combine uniques and exalt it into legendaries is all just very cool. It's clearly, I would say, one of the best overall designed crafting systems in the history of ARPGs probably. It's also for something not directly related to crafting, but the whole target farming uniques via woven echoes or just slamming glyphs of envy on a particular timeline to be able to do that timeline's boss. Rune of Ascendancies and all of these things that allow you to like target farm. Build defining uniques is quite cool, and a lot of the uniques in this game are quite interesting as well and actually add a lot of alteration to your playstyle or your build. Following that, special random content or like league mechanic-esque things such as loot lizards, etc. I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10. I thought they were very good, and they felt particularly good from about like level 1 to 50. And then from like level 50 till I stopped playing the game after I killed Abberoth, they didn't feel nearly as good, unfortunately. But I'll talk more about that later. But if you take out that section and like if that was resolved via other solutions that aren't directly related to these like random encounters themselves, then 8 out of 10. I think it's very good. Loot lizards are super fun. It's a good name, catchy name. Shrines feel great, like very, very good, way better than in any game I've ever played, actually. It almost feels like every time you click a shrine, you are rewarded, and there's a lot of them, so it's like just quite nice. Almost feels a little arcadey, but it's not too much. Nemesis encounters are cool, and actually feel very rewarding, especially, like I said, in those earlier levels. And the egg thing, where you can like slot a unique in there and like get extra affixes, is also quite nice in the end game. I only ended up using it once though, and I got dog shit affixes like dodge rating on my boots, so it is what it is. The rogue mages or whatever, the things that spawn in like the rune cages, they felt lackluster to me, but it was probably because I was playing Ukachukka Sentinel class, and there's a lot of like ward per second and ward after using evade affixes on those items, so it's probably why. Champions were pretty cool. Like, they weren't significantly interesting, but they did usually drop good loot. They felt rewarding, and you could feel that they were stronger than the other enemies. Never really felt like you could die to them, but they did feel a little bit more bullet spongy at least. They didn't just like evaporate into thin air immediately. And yeah, I think these special random encounters, as well as crafting, which, like I said, I'll expand more upon this later, but I think these should probably be toned down a little bit in the campaign and early endgame. This kind of goes hand in hand with the difficulty thing, but also with the character progression stuff. Like, I have an example. I have a pair of boots. I'll probably throw them up on screen. I got these at probably level 30, and I literally used them for the entire rest of the game. In my Abberoth kill, I was still using the same pair of boots, and it's just kind of like, the fact that I had access to those at level 30 and going all the way through the rest of the game, the only way I could have really improved upon them would be getting a better base type, which is, I mean, it's going to be helpful, obviously, but, you know, how much of that, like, you're going to perceive is, you know, you're unlikely to perceive any difference by just changing the base type, even though it would be an improvement. And then outside of that, I could get, like, an exalted pair of boots, and I'd have to hope that the boots have enough forging potential for me to be able to reseal a new affix that's like T3 or T4. I think the ones that I have are T4 sealed affix, and then also get all of the other good affixes. And it's just like, the fact that I got these boots from a Nemesis encounter at like level 30 and was able to craft on them and just put the best affixes that I could ever want, and pretty much get full T5 affix boots with 5 affixes, it's just like, well, like, I guess I'm never upgrading my boots ever again, which obviously eventually I could, of course, you know, getting a unique pair of boots with LP3 or something and then go slam an exalted pair on them. I know, but being able to go that long should be indicative of the fact that you're probably getting too much power too quickly into the game, which is actually shutting down some of the perceived character progression as the game goes on. But like I said, I will expand upon this much more in the bad stuff section. Everything related to Monoliths, I'm going to give this about an 8 or a 9 out of 10. I actually thought Monoliths were quite good. The speed, efficiency, and quality of life all felt superb. Blessings are pretty cool, and I like the way that the boss is like kind of woven into the whole timeline thing as you go through and, you know, finish echoes, you do the timeline stability or whatever, then you have access to the boss, and you can obviously speed this up with Glyphs of Envy, etc., etc. I thought all of this was pretty intuitive, felt pretty good. Doesn't take like a full-on PhD to understand like certain things do within POE, for example. But it was quite good. I will say the blessings, although they felt good, I felt like they were kind of annoying to farm for, in my opinion. Until I have all of them discovered, I probably shouldn't be able to get repeats of the same one that I've already discovered. What I mean by that is, you know, if I kill the boss a second time and I discovered 5 blessings the first time, the next time I should discover 5 new blessings. So that way, by the time I've killed him like 4 or 5 times, even if I don't have the best rolls on all the blessings, I at least have all the blessings. Because I've killed the Reign of Dragons guy like 10 times and haven't gotten the freaking all resistances thing, and it's just like, I wanted to get that before I fought Abberoth, and then I just gave up on it because it's like, okay, this shit's just annoying. I'm just getting repeats over and over and over again, and it was quite unfun. In addition to that, corruption feels alright for juicing your content to me, but I'm not really a huge personal fan of the whole artificial, just infinitely scaling HP and damage systems in games, and it feels like there is a lack of customization as well when it comes to juicing your content. Yes, you do have access to the Weaver tree, which allows you to sort of specialize in things, and you can slam woven echoes in your timeline, etc. But I don't know, I feel like there should be probably more. When I'm playing my Void Knight, I don't really care about the rogue mages or whatever that spawn in the rune cages. I'm pretty sure I've never gotten a single item from them or a single useful item from them. But I do like the loot lizards, I can tell you that for sure. So maybe giving me some sort of consumable that allows me to like alter the next 15 echoes to have 0 of the mages, but 100% more loot lizards, or just random things like that. It's not exactly a watertight example that I just gave, but hopefully you get the idea. Just a little bit more customization for the ways that I can, you know, improve certain types of content or, you know, focus on what I enjoy the most for whatever character I'm playing. Moving on to endgame systems, and I'm going to give this about a 9 out of 10 as well. I actually think some of the things they did here were very smart. The SSF faction versus the trading faction was super duper cool, and on a little side note here, the SSF faction thing could be a massive godsend for PoE 2 potentially if it was just implemented in a slightly different format. If you can imagine you're making your character in PoE 2, you click SSF, and then there's an optional checkbox that says like recommended new player SSF experience or something, or improved SSF experience. You click it on and you get like a ton of bonuses to like currency drops, crafting material drops, item drops, unique drop rate is improved, like all these different things. Or you could like scale that up as you leveled up and, you know, did mechanics. You can improve it just like you can in Last Epoch. It'd be so insane, because one of the major problems in PoE 2 right now that I think basically no one talks about is the disconnect between SSF and Trade League. At least to me, it seems like if you watch the interviews, Jonathan clearly seems to be a Trade League player, and he doesn't seem to have like the full know-how of the SSF experience and like the hardcore SSF experience especially. And it seems like those guys are having a pretty rough time right now with the limited crafting options, limited currency drops, limited ability to like actually beat end game bosses, and lack of like good useful uniques dropping from them, or at least at a good rate. So, you know, long story short, something like this could be insane in PoE 2 if implemented properly. Outside of that, I haven't really used the trading faction in Last Epoch, so I can't say much here or take what I say with a grain of salt, but I haven't really gotten the vibe that it's super popular in this game, nor does it really seem necessary. Weaver faction seems pretty cool. Tombs and cemeteries, though, felt a little lackluster to me, and after I got a couple good relics with like good enchants, I literally never entered a single one, like a single cemetery or Tomb of the Erased again, outside of the 2 or 3 times that I did it to just slam like 10 Lostwood Folly echoes in my timeline to get my unique sword, to just like target farm my unique sword. And actually I did it one other time to get the set item Shatter Woven Echo or whatever. If you know, you know. And then finally, built-in loot filter and stash tab systems. Not much to say here. 10 out of 10, obviously. Nothing but good things to say here. Of course, there are some things they could probably improve upon, but the fact that they're all built into the game, customizable, and most importantly, available to everyone for free, it's more than I could ask for. So, hats off for that one. And now we are on to the bad stuff. Please do keep in mind that this is just my personal opinion, and it is fully intended to be constructive criticism, no doomer posting or anything like that. Whether or not the developers do or don't watch the video, if they do and they don't deem the information to be valuable, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. Fully intended to just spark discussion about the game. If some large majority of the community seems to agree with the thoughts that I put forward, perhaps we'll see some changes. If not, it's okay. But starting off with the first one, and this was a massive downside for me. I mean, so much so that, you know, I intended to get to Abberoth prior to making this video. By the time I was at like 200, 250 corruption, I was severely considering just like stopping there. You know, I was mentally battling logging off and not making it to Abberoth. And this first one is going to be character progression / difficulty. It could be broken down into 2 topics, but they really just play so much hand in hand the more I thought about it. And I put a lot of time thinking about this, like how to phrase it, what specifically seemed to be causing the issue. And it's honestly, you know, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it's actually a pretty complex topic and would likely be quite tricky to actually resolve. But I'm going to do my best to give you kind of my position or my take on it. So, long story short, I think character progression is extremely important in ARPGs, and more specifically, perceived character progression. There's kind of 2 sides to this. There's like the reality of the progression, which is like numbers go up, but then there's the perceived side of things, which is what you visibly see on your screen when you're like actually playing the game. Just because you put an item on and it improves your stats, if it doesn't change what's happening on your screen in a way that like the naked eye can notice it, then to me it doesn't really apply that much, because like you don't feel it. You know, and we're not playing WoW. We're not parsing in a raid. You know, so like to me, what really matters is what I can see and what I can feel, not explicitly what's happening in the background. When I put an item on that is an upgrade, I want to feel the upgrade. That's like really, you know, I think that's super, super important in ARPGs. So I'm going to try and illustrate a hypothetical here to get my point across. I'm going to do the best I can. Like I said, I think this is a pretty complex topic, so try to stay with me if you can. But if you could imagine that your character progression is effectively oversimplified into a power level scale, 0 to 100. 100 is you're killing enemies at the speed of light, you're moving at 100% movement speed, and you're not effectively, you are immortal at 100 power level. So for PoE terms, we could say that's like a 15 Mirror of Kalandra investment or something. No average player is ever getting to that point, even over the course of like an entire league. But getting to power level 90, we could say that's like a 30 divine investment. Your average player could get there over the course of a singular league if they really put their mind to it. And in PoE 2, for perspective, PoE 2 is not perfect in this, but I do think, contrary to popular belief, it is quite good in this particular topic. But in PoE 2, let's say you start at like negative 25, which is like kind of a pain point. But the benefit is that over the course of PoE 2, when I play it at least, I feel like you are consistently going up and up and up and up. And then eventually it kind of does slow down a little bit. Like once you get to the point where you're buying items and like multiple divines per item, it kind of feels like it slows down a little bit. But for a good chunk of playtime, it feels pretty good. Like you're going up and up and up. You feel stronger at the end of Act 3 than you did at Act 1. You feel stronger at the end of Act 3 Cruel than you did at Act 3. And you feel even stronger at T15 maps than you did at the end of Act 3 Cruel. Now, the problem for Last Epoch lies in the fact that you start out at around like a 0 to a 5, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Perfectly okay with that. But by the time you get to like level 30 or 50, which in perspective for a new player, I would envision would be about 3 to 5 hours. I know if you've played the game, you can get there much, much quicker. But new player, they're getting there in about 3 to 5 hours, give or take. At that point, assuming you have like any experience with ARPGs, the crafting systems in Last Epoch are so intuitive, and this is going to be one of those situations where too much of a good thing is actually a bad thing. But you have access to so much that by the time you're like level 30 to 50, you're approaching 100. Like you're at a 98, give or take, and you're really only being held back by your speed, or that's the thing I would grant, that from like level 40 to, you know, the end of the game, or from level 40 to me beating Abberoth, I did improve my speed, at least perception-wise. Like my character got faster, and I could notice my character getting faster. But by the time I was level 40 to 50, the entire rest of the game, which was another, like, I say rest of the game, but when I say that, just know I mean until I killed Abberoth. But ultimately, from around level 40 to 50 until I killed Abberoth, my defense and offense, which are, you know, quite important in my mind for character progression, felt perpetually locked at just like roughly 98. So it was very, very quick into the game that I was already killing enemies at the speed of light, and I felt practically immortal. And I'm really not trying to over exaggerate here, but I like legit could have played the game with my toes. Like I could have leaned back in my chair, had my arms tied behind my back, kicked my toes, my big feet up on the desk, and been chilling. You know, I would have been cooling in echoes throughout the entire normal monolith, probably all the way up to like 250 corruption. I would have been fine. And now, before you say it, because I know there's some of you out there that say, oh, well, trust me, it gets hard at a certain corruption. I'm not going to necessarily disagree with you, but I don't think that that is inherently actually a good thing. I know some people will say, like, well, this allows you to choose your difficulty. But the problem is you don't get to choose your difficulty for a long time. And if you bring up the frickin' Cursed Veteran boots, I couldn't care less. Like, no average new player is going to know about the Cursed Veteran boots, nor are they going to care to take up one of their item slots to, like, make the game harder. That should just be, like, we should have this difficulty curve built into the natural flow of the game. You shouldn't have to go get an item to make it feel good. But long story short, with the corruption thing, so very early on you're way up here, and then for a long time you're just stagnated and you don't feel anything. Like it actually feels mindless, and it's just like mind numbing for a long time. You practically don't get any upgrades really at that point. You get like couple percent upgrades here and there, and then when you finally get to like deeper end game, you start to get like some uniques or like some things that you can do with LP and legendary potential. But even those don't feel that great anymore because you've already been so high on the scale for so long at that point that like everything just feels numb. But then finally, Like for me, this was like 250 plus corruption. My mind is numb. It's mush at this point. I've face tanked every mechanic in the entire game for the last 6+ hours. I get to like 250 corruption, and I'm doing one of the timeline bosses. It's the Lagan one. I can't remember which timeline that's called right now, but it's the one with Lagan as the boss. And I get one shot by his eye beam mechanic. And at first I was like, oh, that's kind of annoying. But then I realized, like, oh wait, shit, this is actually kind of cool, because like finally I have to engage. And then I engaged with his mechanics. It took me like 2 more tries. I learned how to deal with his mechanics. And I was like, okay, wait, this is actually fun. Like, this boss fight's actually pretty good. When his eye glows red, that means you have to run to the middle so then you can swap sides so he doesn't like sweep his beam over and kill you. But there's a couple issues here. One, a new player is going to deal with this, or like your average player is going to deal with this and be pretty annoyed. You can see it with Quinn and like other people. When they finally get to that point to where they get one shot by a mechanic that for the entirety of the game so far they've face tanked, it's not, they're unlikely to have that same experience that I just had, where it's like, oh yes, I just got randomly one shot. They're probably going to be annoyed, or it's just going to feel weird to them that they've been so strong for so long, and then out of nowhere they just die. In addition to that, does this really make sense? Like, does this, like, who looks at this curve and thinks, yes, so a new player for the first 10 hours of the game is going to feel like Jesus up here, and then at some point into the very deep end game, where in my mind you would think like the deeper into the game you get, the stronger you should get, eventually you're going to be able to drag your perceived power level down via this corruption mechanic, only for, guess what, to just go right back up to the same thing you were already at. Like, just like this whole argument that people have of, oh, we'll just wait till you get to the right corruption. It makes no sense, because you've already experienced God mode. Like, you've already experienced God mode for the last 6 hours. So just because I can bring my power level down temporarily to then bring it back up to the already previously obtained perceived power level, it makes no sense. Like, this is not, this in my head, and maybe I'm being too harsh. Like I said, feel free to agree to disagree with me here on this one, but this character progression curve, it makes no sense. I'm not a game developer, so it's not really my place to sit here and try and say like what they can do to fix this, because this is a complicated issue to fix. I can tell you that much for sure. But a couple things that I thought of as just examples would be, for example, with the crafting system, you have the tier 5 of the affixes is like the max allowed via crafting. What if earlier in the game it was lower? Like, what if you didn't get to craft to tier 5 until level 70? And so at like level 40, you can only craft up to tier 3. And like level 60, you can craft up to tier 4. And then 70, you can craft up to tier 5. So that way, by the time I'm level 30, I don't have a pair of boots with 4 T5 affixes that, mind you, are the best possible affixes for my build, because I can already choose them with the crafting system, which I do like. But like I said, this is one of those things where too much of a good thing is actually a bad thing. Another example is like nemesis encounters and stuff like that. Maybe those shouldn't be as strong early on, or at the very least, maybe they shouldn't be able to like roll as many extra affixes on the item, or like sealed affixes and stuff. Maybe you should have I think you already do, but you should probably have even more, significantly less, like Weaver Will opportunities. Probably just make uniques in general, like build defining uniques, maybe a little bit less common early in the game. I mean, by the time I got to Endgame, I had like 3 stash tabs full of uniques that I could have, thrown on like a shit ton of different builds, and it would have made them very strong. You could even make sealed affixes all together, just locked behind some Endgame unlock. Like the first time your first monolith that you complete, you now unlock sealed affixes, so glyphs of despair can start dropping. And then you can also start finding it naturally through nemesis encounters and stuff like that. And prior to unlocking it, you wouldn't be able to see it, or like any extra affixes or whatever in nemesis encounters and stuff. But obviously there is a plethora of things you could do to kind of chip away at this issue. But like I said, I'm not a game developer. It It's very hard to see all of the hidden implications of any given change when you don't have access to the back end of stuff. I can speak from experience working at like a company that's decently large. I don't know exactly how large EHG is, but in my case, I can speak from experience to say that, yeah, usually changing things within a massive company is much easier said than done. There's a lot of checks and balances usually, and you have to be very careful about like the change you're going to make is going to probably have impacts and effects for the whole game, not just the specific thing you're changing. So it's quite tricky. With that being said, I know this is pretty complicated and I kind of rambled for a fat ass minute. I apologize, but hopefully you guys kind of get what I'm talking about, or maybe you've experienced it yourself, maybe you haven't. But let's go ahead and jump into the next one. And last but not least for the bad stuff is going to be boss fights. Like I said, I didn't want to go over everything. I wanted to try and highlight the big, massive pain points for me. And this is obviously going to be another one. Unfortunately, I think these are just such a wasted asset currently within the game, because I talked about this before in the good stuff section actually, but I think the boss fights are actually quite good. They're visually pleasing. The whole telegraphed, flashy mechanic idea or, vision for the boss fights I think is quite good, reminiscent of WoW, and they've implemented it quite well, minus the fact that you can literally face tank every single boss mechanic for just such an extended period of time that it's like, I mean, it is actually laughable, to be perfectly honest. I mean, you can actually beat the game. You can beat normal monoliths prior to going to empowered monoliths and fight your first harbinger. And it's very, very likely that I could have fought it with my eyes closed, with my big toes, etc. Like, I mean, it is overdone. I don't know how they let it get this easy. And if you want to like hide behind the idea or cope with the idea that the real game doesn't start until X level of corruption or whatever, I think you're just doing the game a disservice and you're ignoring the very vital aspect to a game's success, which is the new player experience. And contrary to popular belief, but just because someone is a casual player or maybe a new player does not mean that they want to be absent from any amount of challenge whatsoever, or that they don't want to have any obstacles to overcome, because those are actually the things that make games fun. Like having problems and then having to solve the problems is actually, quite enjoyable more often than not. And these big flashy telegraphed mechanics do you no good if everybody can just face tank them. So like I said, that's going to be the last one for the bad stuff. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hopefully the whole character progression difficulty topic made sense. I know I kind of rambled a bit on that one, but it was a huge pain point for me. It's very sad because like I actually love the game and it's super duper fun, but the amount of character progression that I experienced from like level 40 until I beat Abberoth was nearly zero. There was some, but it was practically zero, and the perceived power level increase might as well have just been zero, to be honest. I was already killing monsters at the speed of light and nearly immortal by like level 30 to 50, and yeah, it's just a shame. With that being said, I'm going to be going back to POE 2 here in the next day or so. I'm going to be making a chaos.lich. I hope you guys are excited for that. Obviously, I'll be making some build guides. I do plan to do like a one divine budget build challenge once I get to Endgame. We'll see how that goes. And I appreciate the support, guys. Let me know if you agree or disagree with everything I said here in the comments and why. Feel free to let me know. I do read all the comments. And I'll catch y'all in the next one. Later, chefs. And last but not least, take it easy, chefs.
Watch your blue eyes fade to gray as you fade away, as you fade away.